furniture business over in Oliver Springs, but we call him Sonny. Welcome to Riders of the Silver Screen.
Thank you.
Yes,
Glad
sir.
to be here.
You know, some time back, it was either on the radio and then later on in the newspapers, quite a stir about an old murder that is still unsolved, with two sisters being murdered, and a wrongful death resulting from that, I guess, was it a lynching?
Oh, well, they were shot.
Shot. From a young boy who they believed had nothing to do with the deaths of these people. And all of these years, it has pretty much gone unsolved. Now, you lived there all of your life?
Well, not all of my life, but nearby. My wife always was born and reared in Oliver Springs. And I lived a few miles down the road, and of course this happened 61 years ago.
Right.
So I was only 9 years old.
Would you paint the picture and tell us a little bit, what was Oliver Springs like 61 years ago? Small town.
Oliver Springs was a beautiful town. It was full of beautiful homes with antebellum styling and architecture, and there was quite a bit of business going on there. There's a coal mining town, but the engineers and the higher echelon of the area lived in Oliver Springs. It was a beautiful place, and it still is today, but nothing like what it was then. We've lost a lot of houses. Well,
and I'm going to ask this question because I don't know, but having the name Springs on the end of it, did it attract people from the north to come down to let's say, take advantage of the water in the area, in the springs?
Yes. In as early as shortly after 1800, when Oliver Springs was being a lot of people coming in, setting up the homesteads and so forth. It was the Indians first told the newcomers of the wealth and the value of the water, the medicine water. And there was a hotel, or motel, built 1838, 35-room inn, that was the first commercially operated source. And after that, then later, the large hotel that was finished in 1895, a 150-room hotel. There was the Magnesium Springs was on the premises, and we had the Sulphur Springs about, well, the spring house had 7 different artesian-type waters coming up in sulfur, and definitely was an exciting place to be and to see.
Well, now, these people who had the money to afford such a thing, and back in those days travel was quite tough to do, but they would come down then, stay in the hotels, and the hotels then had a facility for taking baths in these waters?
Well, not so much taking baths as was drinking the water.
I see.
It was, and then even on Saturday, on the weekends, there was a train from Knoxville to Oliver Springs to carry the people who spent the weekend at the hotel.
Something?
Yeah.
Well, what a beautiful, glorious past. Now, tell me, with that setting now established, tell me about the murder of these sisters.
The hotel was actually probably the result of the Richard family, who came to Oliver Springs in about 1870 in that area. And they brought, they were from Wales and lived in Knoxville for a while, but saw the potential need of their being in Oliver Springs near their properties. They owned a great deal. In fact, they had about 1,350 acres of property at one time. And very influential people. They were highly educated. They were very sophisticated. They were very talented. They were doctors and musicians and religious workers. The family was tremendous, valiant, and really played a big part in the beginning of Oliver Springs.
Right. And tell me about what led up to the murders.
Well, it was really a shock because the Richard sisters, who lived in perhaps the most beautiful home there was in our town, their mother had just died 5 months before. And they lived in perhaps was the grandfather's home, which was rebuilt after the first one burned, and it was a magnificent, beautiful 3-story type home.
Antebellum type.
Yeah, antebellum type home. And one of the sisters was a bookkeeper at the brick plant. Oliver Springs is known for early success in the brick making. And the other sister worked in the bank. and they were very reputable, highly esteemed people. And they had a daughter, had a helper who carried in their coal and did their little going to the store for them and things like that. And his name was Powder. He was only 16 years old, but they had a tremendous amount of confidence in him, and evidently he was influential enough to win their goodwill and belief in him. And really, there's not anything that we know. Is still a mystery as to why that this murder came about. Mm-hmm. And of course, for all these 61 years, the average person, most of the people in our town, never believed that Powder Brown, the black boy that was helping them doing their odd jobs, was capable of doing this murder.
And double murders, right?
It was a double murder. They was both killed, and then later he was also killed, and he was upstairs, which was highly unusual for him to have been guilty of causing the murder and then go back upstairs and kill himself.
Right. So the belief is then that they had no one to blame, or perhaps the people who did it would cast a suspicion on the young black boy, the servant, right, and made it look as if he did the killing. Then what happened to him?
Well,
he was killed right there?
He was killed at the same time they were, all in the same afternoon. And there is, like I said, the sentiment of the town believed that he was not capable of doing this murder. And we noticed in refreshing our minds, going back and reading things that happened at that time, that it seemed to be very few people in town believed that he was capable of doing it.
But now, he was killed that day by whom?
Well, he supposedly had killed himself. It's supposed to be 2 murders and a suicide. And
well, that's unlikely that he would walk back upstairs, take a gun and shoot himself up there. So there has been suspicion over the years. What brought all of this new interest that is about ongoing now? There was a big piece in the paper not long ago, and radio stations are talking about it, and there has been even some national press on it. What brought all of this back after 61 years, or has it been continued all that time?
Well, actually, we have a very successful historical society in town, and a lot of activity, a lot of people belonging to it, and we've been going back and restoring historical things about the town. And the murder has always been the first thing that everyone would talk about, but because it has never ceased to be a non-conversational.
On the minds of everybody.
On the minds of everyone. And in the course of perhaps getting a book written about the murder and the things that surrounded the murder, new evidence came out that there was a man who had knowledge of some activity around the Richards home the day of the murder that caused, in fact, it caused him to reopen the case. And so the chief of police went back and reopened the case and came to the same conclusion that most of the people in town did, that Powder Brown was not guilty of the murder and suicide, that they were all killed by other people.
Now, with all of this time having passed and going through various justice and law enforcement administrations, obviously each one carried it on to the next one, I guess, and still just decided, well, that this is unsolvable, and just sort of wrote it off?
Well, I think that the rendering of a decision by the sheriff of Anderson County, that part of town happened to be in Anderson County, I think that he signed the case up as 2 murders and a suicide, which never did satisfy the people in Oliver Springs. And
well, we're going to be talking more about this over the next 2 weeks. We're going to move from this whole story has brought about so much attention, not only locally, but as I mentioned earlier, nationally. There are some people here locally who are interested in doing, first of all, a book on this story, and then secondly, WIVK with Sam Brown, they've been talking on the radio, keeping people updated on this. They're supposed to be, and tell me if I'm wrong, there might be some evidence that would point to the innocence of this young boy who was supposedly who shot himself.
That I'm not sure all the things. Some of this is still not available to all the people, and I know that the Tennessee TBI was brought into it, and of course our chief of police, and they've been working together. So all the evidence that they have found, the chief did make the statement though that the evidence did not point that the black boy did the killing, nor was he one that he did not kill himself.
Didn't they have a proper burial for this young man recently?
Well, he was buried in the Black Cemetery in Oliver Springs in an unmarked grave. And it is kind of a unusual thing that happened. A member of the Richards family asked that there would be a stone put to identify him and put in the Black Cemetery, honoring him as one who probably had suffered for 61 years being blamed for something he did not do. And so there was a little service in the cemetery, and we had cousins of his that was there, and some of the most influential black people in our town, and
well, Sonny,
had a funeral.
I want to thank you for coming and sharing this with us and telling us about this. Next week we're going to have Phil Dorr, who's thinking of doing a movie script for this thing. And if that comes about, we may have not only a book, but a movie, and who knows what else will come out of this. And maybe by that time, we might even know the real person who committed these things. We don't know. All of this is going to play itself out. I know we don't have but about 30 seconds. Tell me real quick about the Pony guy, the sheriff, the marshal there, about how he got killed in the Oliver Springs. Was it Pony?
Pony Cash. Yeah. Pony Cash was his name. That is a story that's been handed down to me. The hotel was in big fashion, and a lot of folks going to the dance there that night on Saturday night, and somehow, some way, he and someone who weren't getting along too good wound up with him being shot and didn't survive.
And they tell me that the same man who shot him died in almost the same location a year or so later.
That's what I hear.
Yes. Isn't that unusual? Yes. Now, he was a marshal or a sheriff, or what was he?
He was town marshal.
Town marshal. Boy, that's just like the West. That's what I told you.